Hi there, it's Wednesday, and that means it's time for Prices at the Pumps, SaltWire's weekly look at all things energy related. I'm Scott Squires, pleased to be joined as always by the energy expert Dan McTeague. Couple things to talk about quickly this week, Dan. I know that you're on a bit of a time crunch. We'll get to that in a second. But first things first, consumers want to know, where are prices headed in the Atlantic region tomorrow and Friday?
Good question, because we're starting to see prices moving up, Scott. Newfoundland will see a 3.2 cent a litre increase for gasoline, 1.1 cents for both diesel and heating oil. And for the balance of Atlantic Canada, the three provinces, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, PEI, I would expect that gas prices will move in the same direction, 3 cents a litre up. But diesel a little higher, probably about 2 cents a litre. And that's really because of what we're seeing on the markets. Two factors: a drop in U.S. Oil inventories, mostly due to the freeze in the U.S. Midwest. And now news this morning that China is in fact going to begin to stimulate radically its market, which will mean likelihood of greater oil demand at a time in which supply is not as strong as it should be. So this might be the beginning of what we normally see coming out of January. Prices tend to go up. It may go on a more accelerated rate in the weeks to come.
And Dan, you've kind of been foreshadowing this the last few weeks, that while, we were kind of feeling good about stable prices, a little drop here and there, you said that it could very well start to creep up. And we've seen a bit of an upward trend in Atlantic Canada in the prices at the pumps the last few weeks. Where do you see the prices going over the next couple of weeks and beyond, knowing that there's so many factors that can change day to day, week to week?
Well, the energy markets have also discounted what's happening in the Red Sea, in the Gulf of Oman. You can't ignore that. And to the ones that are ignoring this, usually because they're investing based on algorithms, they're not really involved with, the fundamentals. They do so at a very precarious risk to underestimating the severity of the impacts on global supply chains, not just for oil and gas, obviously, but also for other products. So this could have a bit of a wake-up call and a bit of a surprise for a lot of us. My sense is that we're going to continue to see 2 and 3 cent a litre increases over the next couple of weeks, maybe a bit of calm the second week of February until about the middle of March. But between now and then, bank on an increase of an average of about 5 to 6 cents a litre between now and the middle of February for gasoline, and about 8 to 10 cents a litre for diesel. This, of course, could mean, for many people, predictions on lower for longer prices are completely out the window, as I thought they would be.
And Dan, I know that you and I talk about a lot of different things that can affect energy prices in Canada. And I know a lot of times we talk about interest rates and where they're going, and inflation rates, and being Wednesday, all kinds of reports, and the Bank of Canada holding steady for a couple of weeks now, keeping it at 5%. What do you see in terms of what that signals in where things are going with interest rates, inflation, and other economic indicators in Canada?
I think the Bank of Canada is going to take a wait and see hold approach. What is going to become clear, though, for many Canadians is that while the U.S. Fed may start to taper and bring interest rates down, the same may not be true here of Canada. We may very well see a scenario where prices, or at least interest rates, remain high and for longer, and for little reason to do with energy and true inflation, but things like, for instance, the national government debt. It's huge. It's massive. And it's likely to disappoint, meaning that as we saw in the 1990s, when I was a member of Parliament, you're going to have to keep interest rates high to attract people to buy Canadian bonds to service those debts. I realize this may be inconvenient and a disappointment to many people, but that's why I believe we may very well see a continuation of these high prices for quite some time as far as interest rates are concerned, with no major relief in sight. Maybe a quarter point, but that's a big issue and has a lot to do in terms of unpacking fiscal and monetary policy, which may not have gotten it right in this country. Another factor that a lot of people tend to overlook: you can't fight inflation when you're increasing the Canadian population by 3.5% a year. Immigration, which is great, but it has to be done in a way that's manageable. And I think even the government now has to admit its mistakes, not just with students, but with the sheer amounts that were brought in are not able to be absorbed into the economy. More importantly, they represent a permanent 3% increase in inflation. And what that means is that the government's, or the Bank of Canada's, focus on getting inflation down to 2% is a bit of a Pyrrhic battle. It's a lost cause even before it begins, because again, inflation will rise correspondingly with the number of people that come into the country, which is 3%. And that doesn't include the federal government's increases in carbon taxes, which we're going to see once again on April Fool's Day.
And Dan, I wanted to get to this last week, but I didn't. We talk about things that are specifically for Atlantic Canada and the Atlantic Canadian region, but we also talk about things that affect us coast to coast, because a lot of times things that may happen in, middle Canada, Western Canada, the prairies, et cetera, can affect what happens here in Canada or can have some influence. So this is a video that I saw last week, and it's from someone, her profile on X is Chris Sims. And I'll just read you a bit of her profile here. Taxpayers Federation, rural Western gal, as a longtime reporter, assesses info for yourself. Images of beauty, freedom, and history, geeky fan X, and a few other things that she has on her profile.
Know her well.
But
yeah.
A video that caught my eye and ear is the following. I'll play that for you now, then I want to get your reaction to it, Dan.
Happy winter. It's about -40 out right now, so it's super cold, and I'm trying to pump some gas here without freezing my hand. So this is just a reminder. It is about -40 degrees outside right now with the wind, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government is punishing Canadians with his carbon tax for the sin of staying warm this winter. So it's going to cost you about $300 extra this winter to heat your home in the carbon tax. And now he's going to be jacking up the carbon tax this coming April. So that means, things like gasoline, diesel, home heating like natural gas and propane are all going to cost you more. In fact, the average Alberta family is going to be out more than $900 just this year, just in Justin Trudeau's carbon tax. That's net. That's with the rebates factored in. Folks, this is all of the financial pain for people who can't afford it right now with no environmental gain. Okay, it is not making a dent in emissions. The carbon tax is just an enormous tax grab. So do the right thing, pick up the phone, make a call to your member of parliament, send an email to the Prime Minister, sign our petition to scrap the carbon tax in Canada.
Now, Dan, obviously, Chris is making that video in Alberta, and that is specific to Albertans. However, there's some things that can have relatable points to us here in Atlantic Canada. Overall, what do you make of what she's saying in that video and how it can affect all Canadians, but specifically Atlantic Canadians?
Well, Atlantic Canadians won't be immune, and they will find, as do many parts of the country, Ontario, Quebec, that they will see that the rebate will not cover the actual amount, the true amount, the net amount of what the carbon tax increases will place on us, not just for transportation, but on directly on the cost of heating our homes. But beyond that, it also doesn't, as we know, the rebate doesn't take into account secondary costs. So the cost of food, for instance, much of it influenced to a large extent, not just by the first carbon tax, but the second carbon tax, the clean fuel standard, which now applies here in Atlantic Canada. So all of these things are going to continue to go up, and they are not rebated. And so I guess it comes down to, Atlantic Canadians have to fish or cut bait. Can they afford this? No. Are they getting enough rebate to cover what the government's proposed to increase? No. So really it comes down to the pain will have to be shared by all Canadians, as long as we have a government in Ottawa that is committed to believing that these kind of onerous regulations and taxes are somehow going to change and influence weather, which is really what this comes down to. I know many people don't like that simplicity, but it is that. And we have to keep in mind another thing that I worked on 25 years ago, tax on tax. When you consider that the HST being applied to the carbon taxes will give the federal government about $500 million, $500 million next year, will give provinces, depending on their size, of course, a corresponding equivalent amount broken up, of course, among the provinces between 5% and 15%, whether they have GST or HST. The reality is that for a lot of governments, this may be a great thing, but it's terribly devastating to the bottom line of consumers, and it ought to be scrapped. Not just the first carbon tax, but the second one as well. And it brings me to the bigger issue, of course. There's no reason why we should be pursuing this fantasy of net zero. It's great for elites and people who've got lots of money and want to rub shoulders at these international conferences, but it doesn't do a thing for a clean country like Canada, Atlantic Canadians, for which there isn't the kind of massive population and industrial base that is causing these problems, if indeed we accept those.
And Dan, I know that you're tight for time. Before I get to my next question for you, just quickly, where are you? What are you doing today?
I'm at Sheridan College here in Oakville. I'm providing teachers and some of the students here a bit of background on energy, how price is formed, and dynamics in terms of energy's role in terms of the wider economy. It's an important discussion. I'm glad to see colleges are taking this up, because for the longest time, the only courses they were given or instructions were given on how great climate change policy is without taking into account and given due regard to the impacts on affordability and the cost of everything, which is now the number one issue in Canada, whether people wanted to recognize it or not. The schools are starting to pay attention. I think that's a very healthy thing. I'm here to help, even on short notice.
Yeah, that certainly is an interesting thing, and we'll ask you more about that next week. And that leads me to my next question. You know, you were talking about the carbon tax and what consumers end up paying out in the long run versus what they get back in the rebates. And I see a lot of back and forth on this, but it really seems to me that there's a lot of folks that are basically explaining with data that consumers actually pay in more in the carbon tax and its related effects than they get back in these rebates. And there seems to be a lot of inability to understand that. And the way I think about it is, Dan, if you give me over the course of a month $100, and then I give you a one-time payment the next month of $70, you might be happy to get the 70, but it's not the full 100 that you gave me. Am I trying to simplify too much here? Or perhaps maybe you can explain it better. Is that kind of a good way of looking at it in simplistic terms?
Well, it is that it is being imposed on folks who can least afford it. And the idea of the rebate is that it signals people's willingness and forcing them to choose other options. The other options are far more expensive, as we know, and likely not as effective or as reliable. Think here of someone going for, Alberta, switching off heating oil to a heat pump, but at minus 15 to minus 20, it no longer works. So there are a number of things to unpack, but rather than taking my concern, and I've raised it well before anyone else did, the parliamentary budget officer has no axe to grind, is there to present facts as they are, has said that 60% of Canadians will be worse off with this carbon tax and rebate than they were had they not had this program. So I think there's a way of getting back and incentivizing changes, but I don't think you do it by clubbing consumers and people over the head. Dan, we'll get you to weigh in on this one quickly. And I ask you because of your time as a member of parliament for 18 years and much longer serving in politics, a lot of buzz, a lot of discussion about what may happen with the leader of the Liberal Party and our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, whether or not he will step down, whether or not the caucus will ask him to step aside and bring somebody else in. This is strictly your opinion, of course. Where do you think it's going in the next 6 months to a year with the Liberal Party of Canada and their leadership, and of course, Canada's Prime Minister? Well, this party is not, and caucus is not like anything I've seen in past or studied in the past, been part of in the past. They're going to circle the wagons here. And it looks like they're willing to go down with the ship. It's pretty clear that Justin Trudeau is disliked universally from coast to coast. The Liberals' best hope is maybe to find another leader and to find a way to trigger a review. But that's impossible to do. The Constitution is very serious and strict. It cannot be done even with a caucus revolt. The ultimate decision lies with Justin Trudeau and Justin Trudeau himself. And by all accounts, he looks like he wants to have his day with Pierre Poilievre. I worry because, of course, my party of 35, 40 years will likely be incinerated in the next election. And I know there's many people out there who love the party and have been as devoted as I have, perhaps not as critical of it in the past several years. But at the end of the day, we do need a strong party at the center. And the Liberals have abandoned that. They've gone to the complete left. And every file they've touched has been wrought with controversy. And much of it in the comport, the way in which the Prime Minister has conducted himself in all of this. So I think the Liberal Party has a chance of salvaging what little it can get and not see a repeat of 2011. If it doesn't, then it will. We will be looking at a 1993 on the Liberal side of returning with a handful of seats. I think it's just that serious, and Canadians are fed up. I would hope that Liberal members of Parliament listening to this take advice from an old pro who's been around this. Don't wait for it to happen. Move now.
And quickly, Dan, to those that like to engage with you, in particular on X, who say you're just a conservative now, not a liberal, what do you say to them, Dan?
Well, you can call me what you want. I really don't care at this point. I know that the track record is pretty strong. And I'll put it this way, and to be very kind, when you've put 35 years into the Liberal Party, you kind of get an understanding of what it really is. And when those making those criticisms that I'm not, I'll suggest that I'll get back to them when they've done 35 years and 18, half of that as a member of Parliament, Privy Councillor.
Fair enough, Dan. Okay, before we let you go, we always enjoy having you with us here on SaltWire each Wednesday. But when you're not joining us on Prices at the Pumps, where can folks reach out to you, connect with you, and just in general, find where you are?
Yeah, Gas Price Wizard on X, Twitter, and of course, president at affordableenergy.ca. Those are the two best ways to get a hold of me. And I read your stuff and looking forward to getting back to everybody as quickly as I can when they do.
Dan, great to have you with us today. I know that you were certainly tight for time. We wish you all the best today and enjoy your time there at Sheridan College. I'm sure we'll talk about that next week.
Looking forward to it. Thanks again for having me, Scott.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Dan.